My name is Alan Burke, and I want to tell you about the day I sat in a conference room and listened to a man explain why 10 years of my life weren't worth a promotion. The room was on the third floor of Veridon Bioanalytics. Small building, gray carpet, a long table that always wobbled on one side because nobody ever fixed it. I had sat in that room for dozens of meetings over the years. Budget reviews, client updates, compliance briefings. I knew every scuff on those walls. It was a Tuesday morning in March. I was 48 years old. Richard Calloway stood at the head of the table. Richard was our division director. 54, always in a pressed shirt, always with the kind of confidence that comes not from doing the work, but from never being questioned about it. He had been my direct supervisor for the last 4 years. He cleared his throat and told us he had an announcement. The lab operations manager position, the role I had been personally told I was being considered for, had been filled. He said her name, Danielle Voss. He said she was a dynamic outside hire with fresh strategic vision. I remember those exact words. Fresh strategic vision. I wrote them down in my notebook while he was still talking because I wanted to make sure I didn't misremember them later. I wanted to be certain that was really what he said. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe to join our community. I share real workplace stories every day for anyone who believes quiet competence should always be respected. Danielle Voss was 31 years old. She had an MBA from a school I'd never heard of and a background in marketing operations. She had never worked in a regulated testing lab in her life. She had been dating Richard Calloway for 8 months. Everyone in that building knew it. The admins knew it. The technicians knew it. The people in accounting knew it. Richard never said that part. He talked about her vision and her energy and her leadership approach. He talked about the lab entering a new phase of growth. He used the word forward 4 times in about 90 seconds. I sat in the 4th chair from the left, and I did not move. I didn't slam the table. I didn't walk out. I didn't say a word. I sat there with my notebook open, and I listened, and I looked at the wobbling corner of that table. And I thought about the fact that the position Richard had just given his girlfriend paid $118,000 a year. My salary at that moment was $74,000. I had been at that number for 2 years, waiting. I also thought about the 2 people sitting across from me, technicians I had personally trained. They were now going to report to Danielle Voss. Nobody in that room made eye contact with me. Not one person. They looked at their phones at the table at Richard. A few of them nodded when he spoke. That was the part that stayed with me the longest. Not Richard's words. The way everyone else went very still and looked away. The meeting ended. People filed out. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and kept working. So let me tell you who I am, because this story only makes sense if you understand what I actually did at that lab. I came to Veridon Bioanalytics 10 years earlier as a laboratory systems coordinator. At the time, the company had about 40 employees and 1 testing facility. My job, in simple terms, was to make sure the operations side of the lab ran without falling apart. That meant sample tracking, client documentation, compliance records, internal workflows, and the daily 1,000 small things that nobody notices until they go wrong. Over 10 years, I became the person that lab ran on. Not because I was trying to be important, because someone had to do it, and I was the one who kept showing up. I had a mortgage. I had a daughter 1 year away from starting college. I had a wife who had told me 3 years in a row that I deserved better than what that company was giving me. I had believed for a long time that if I just kept doing the work would speak for itself. I was wrong about that. But here is what I was not wrong about. The story I am about to tell you did not end in that conference room. When I started at Veridon in 2014, the lab was small and a little disorganized. Not badly run, just growing faster than its systems could handle. They needed someone who could build order without being told exactly how to do it. That was the job they hired me for, even if the title didn't fully say so. In those first 2 years, I built the sample tracking system from scratch. That's the system the lab used to log every testing sample that came in the door, where it came from, what tests were running on it, what stage it was at, where the results were going, and when every deadline was. In a pharmaceutical testing environment, that system is not optional. If it fails, clients don't get their results on time. Regulatory deadlines get missed. In the worst cases, testing data becomes legally unusable. I built that system because nobody else was going to. I maintained it for 8 years. I rebuilt it twice when IT tried to migrate it to newer platforms, and both migrations failed. I also trained nearly every operations technician who came through that building. Not because that was in my job description. It wasn't, not formally, but because the alternative was watching new hires struggle through a system they didn't understand, which meant more errors, which meant more problems I'd have to fix anyway. So I just trained them myself. Over time, I became the main contact for Veridon's 3 largest clients: Harmon Crest Pharmaceuticals, Delway Group, and a regional hospital network called Paulton Health. These are not small accounts. Together, they represented the majority of Veridon's annual revenue. These clients had my cell phone number. They called me directly when they had questions. They trusted my word when there was a problem. That trust wasn't given to me. I built it the same way I built everything else at that lab, by showing up, following through, and never letting a problem sit unanswered. Let me give you 2 specific moments that say everything about how I was valued. The first was a freezer failure at 2 in the morning. I got a call from our overnight technician telling me one of the main storage units had lost temperature. Inside that freezer was nearly $400,000 worth of client samples. If those samples reached the wrong temperature, they were gone. The testing cycles they were part of would have to restart from zero. I drove to the lab at 2 in the morning in January. I spent the next 4 hours manually transferring every sample to backup storage and logging each one by hand. By the time the day shift arrived, the samples were safe and every transfer was documented. I was not given a bonus. I was given a thank you email. The second moment was a compliance audit that almost failed because documentation from the previous year was incomplete. I caught the gap 4 days before the auditors arrived. I stayed in that building for 4 days straight, going through records, correcting files, and building a documentation package that passed the audit cleanly. Same result. Thank you email. My wife, Sandra, used to say the same thing every time something like that happened. She'd say, "Alan, you keep saving a building that doesn't know you're holding it up." She was more right than I wanted to admit. Danielle Voss started on a Monday in April. She came in wearing a blazer and carrying a leather notebook. She smiled at everyone. She shook hands. She said she was excited to learn the operation and bring some fresh energy to the team. I watched all of it from my desk. I want to be fair here. Danielle was not a mean person. She wasn't cruel. She didn't walk in trying to hurt anyone. What she was completely unprepared for the environment she had just stepped into. And that, in some ways, was harder to watch than if she had been openly difficult. A pharmaceutical testing lab is a regulated environment. That means there are rules, not company rules, federal rules, about how documentation is stored, how data is handled, how client records are formatted, and how long everything has to be kept and in what form. These rules exist because the results that come out of a lab like ours can affect whether a drug gets approved, whether a treatment gets used, whether a patient gets the right care. The stakes are real. Danielle had never worked in a regulated environment before, and in her first 2 weeks, it showed. The first thing she changed was the filing system. She decided the way records were organized was inefficient and introduced a new folder structure across the shared drive. It looked cleaner on the surface. The problem was that it broke the document naming format required under FDA record-keeping guidelines. The old structure wasn't pretty, but it was compliant. The new one wasn't. I wrote a note about it privately. I said nothing out loud. The second thing she did was cancel the standing weekly call with Paulton Health. We had run that call every Thursday for 3 years. It was how we kept their team updated on active testing cycles and flagged anything that needed attention before it became a problem. Danielle looked at the calendar, called it redundant, and removed it. She said clients should reach out when they had questions, not the other way around. I documented that too. The third thing was the reporting template. She introduced a new digital format for sending results summaries to clients. Cleaner layout, easier to read, she said. What she didn't know was that Harmon Crest's compliance department required a specific data format in all lab reports they received. It was written into our contract with them. The new template didn't match that format. I knew this. I said nothing. Not yet. Then came the team meeting in May. Richard was there. Most of the operations staff was there. I raised my hand and said, as quietly and professionally as I could, that the new reporting template might create a problem with Harmon Crest contract requirements and that we should probably check before rolling it out fully. Richard looked at me. He didn't look angry. He looked like I had said something slightly embarrassing. He said, "Alan, we're moving forward, not backward." That was it. No discussion. No follow-up. The room moved on. I wrote those words down the same way I had written down fresh strategic vision 6 weeks earlier. Moving forward, not backward. I thought about that line for a long time. And somewhere in those days after that meeting, something shifted in me. Not rage. Not bitterness. Something quieter and colder than either of those. I made a decision. I would keep doing my job. I would do it well. But I would stop going beyond it. I would stop volunteering the information that protected people who had made it clear in every way that mattered that they did not value me. I would let the work speak for itself. This time, I meant that differently. There is something most people don't understand about being the person who keeps things running behind the scenes for 10 years. You don't just accumulate experience. You accumulate weight. The kind of weight that holds a place together without anyone ever seeing it being held. Let me tell you what I actually had. The first thing was the client relationships. All three of Veridon's anchor clients, Harmon Crest, Delway Group, and Paulton Health, knew me by name. Not the company name. My name. My cell number was in their internal contact directories. When something went wrong, or when they needed a straight answer fast, they called me. Not the main line. Not Richard's office. Me. That kind of trust is not a job title. It doesn't transfer when someone new sits down at a desk. It lives in the specific person who earned it over specific years through specific actions. Danielle Voss could introduce herself to every one of those clients 100 times, and she would not have what I had built with them. Not in months. Maybe not in years. The second thing was the tracking system. I had designed it. I had rebuilt it twice. The current version ran on a logic I had developed specifically for Veridon's workflow. The way samples moved through the facility, the way deadlines nested inside each other, the way exceptions got flagged and logged. IT understood the infrastructure it ran on. Nobody else understood the system itself the way I did. I had flagged this internally. Twice. In writing. I said the system represented a single point of failure because only one person, me, had full working knowledge of how it operated. I asked for documentation time and cross-training. Both requests were acknowledged and then quietly dropped. Nothing was done. The third thing was the emails. About 6 weeks before the promotion announcement, I had been accidentally copied on an email thread between Richard and Veridon's CFO, a man named Paul Greider. It happened because Richard had used a group alias that included my address, a leftover from an older distribution list that hadn't been cleaned up. I almost deleted it without reading it. I didn't. What I read was a conversation about the lab operations manager role. Richard was recommending Danielle. Paul was asking whether the posting had gone through the full HR process. Richard said it would, but the decision was already made. He used the phrase "done deal" in the third message. There was a line where Paul asked if they needed to run a full candidate review, and Richard replied, "Just let HR close it out quickly. We're not going in a different direction." I printed those emails. I stored the printed copies at home. I also forwarded the thread to a personal email address I never used for work. I want to be clear about what I did not do with any of this at the time. I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't march into HR. I didn't tell a single person in that building what I had. I just kept it. The way you keep something you don't plan to use unless you absolutely have to. My daughter's name is Ava. She was 17 that spring, 1 year from the college applications that were already on our kitchen table. Sandra and I had been putting money aside for years. The mortgage on our house had 11 years left. I was 48 years old, and I had just been passed over for the one promotion that would have changed the shape of the next decade of my life. I knew what I had. I just had to decide when to use it. The thing about a system that works is that most people only notice it when it stops. For 10 years, things at Veridon ran the way they were supposed to run because I made sure they did. Quietly. Consistently. Without announcement. When I stopped doing that, when I pulled back to exactly the edges of my job description and nothing more, the gaps I'd always been filling started to show. It didn't happen all at once. It happened the way most things break. slowly, then faster. The first sign came with Paulton Health. After Danielle canceled the weekly Thursday call, I had said nothing and done nothing to replace it. That was the decision I had made. 3 months in, Paulton had missed 2 reporting cycles. Nobody on our side had followed up. Nobody had flagged it. The contact I had at Paulton, a woman named Carol Sims who had been working with us for 2 years, had sent 2 emails to the general operations inbox. Neither had been answered. Carol had my cell number. She had not called it yet. I think she was giving the new management a chance to fix it. I documented the missed cycles. I said nothing. The second sign came from Harmon Crest. Their compliance officer, a careful and precise man named David Lorne, sent a formal written complaint to Veridon's operations department about the new reporting template. He cited the specific contract clause that required a standardized format. He said the last 3 reports they received did not meet that requirement and asked for immediate correction. It was the first formal written complaint Veridon had received from a client in over 4 years. The last one had been before my time. I was copied on the complaint because I was still listed as a secondary contact on the Harmon Crest account. I read it. I filed it. I waited to see how Danielle would handle it. The response that went back to David Lorne was polite but vague. It said the team was reviewing the template and would follow up shortly. No timeline. No acknowledgement of the contract clause. No fix. The third sign came by phone. Delway Group's account manager, a man named Greg Tasker, called my cell directly. Not the lab line. Not Danielle. Me. He told me, in a tone that was professional but serious, that his team had been discussing whether Veridon was still the right testing partner for their upcoming product cycle. He said things had felt different over the last few months. He said he was telling me because he respected me and wanted me to know before any formal decision was made. I thanked him. I told him his concerns were completely valid. I told him I was going to document our conversation, and I did, date time, what was said word for word as soon as I hung up. I did not bring any of this to Richard. I did not bring it to Danielle. Inside the lab, 2 of our most experienced technicians resigned within the same month. Both had been with Veridon for more than 5 years. I heard through a colleague that both of them had cited management changes in their exit interviews. Then the tracking system started breaking. It crashed twice in 6 weeks. Both times, Danielle's team had made changes to the data entry protocol without checking with me. Both times I was asked to fix it. Both times I did. The second time, I wrote up a full summary. What caused the failure? What the risk was if it happened again during an active client testing cycle? What needed to change to prevent it? I sent it by email to Richard and copied the operations director. Richard did not respond. I kept the email. I kept the sent receipt. I kept everything. The paper was building itself. I was just making sure none of it got lost. I did not make the decision to leave overnight. It came together over about 3 weeks in late summer, quietly, the way a conclusion forms when you finally stop arguing with what you already know. I had already spoken to an employment attorney. Her name was Patricia Owens. I found her through a referral from a friend who had gone through a workplace dispute a few years earlier. I met with Patricia twice before I handed in my notice. She reviewed the emails I had printed. She reviewed my documentation. She told me what I had, and she told me how to protect it. On a Tuesday morning in September, I printed a clean 2-week resignation letter. 1 page. Professional. No accusations. No explanation beyond the standard language. I walked into Richard's office at 8:45 in the morning, and I placed it on his desk. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. I could see him doing the math in real time, running through what my leaving would actually mean for the lab. He asked me to reconsider. He said the lab needed me. I wanted to sit with that for a moment because I did. The same man who had stood at the head of that conference room table 6 months earlier and handed a $118,000 position to his girlfriend. The same man who had cut me off in a team meeting and said we're moving forward, not backward, was now sitting behind his desk telling me the lab needed me. I told him I appreciated that, and then I told him the truth. I said that for 10 years, I had given that lab everything I had, and that I had spent those 10 years being treated as a resource to be used rather than a professional to be valued. I said it calmly. I said it without raising my voice. I said it the way you say something you have rehearsed, not because you're performing, but because you needed the words to come out right. He asked if this was about the promotion. I said it was about everything. Then I left his office and went back to my desk. That afternoon, I sent a certified letter to Veridon's HR department. Patricia had drafted it. It stated that I was formally preserving all records related to the lab operations manager promotion process and requesting that all relevant communications be retained. It cited the legal basis for the request. HR received it that day. They did not respond. For the next 2 weeks, I did my job. Completely. Professionally. I fixed what needed fixing. I answered what needed answering. I did not delete a single file. I did not remove a single document. What I did do was create a full written summary of every system I managed, what it was, how it worked, what the current risks were, and what needed to happen to keep it running. I emailed that summary to Richard and the operations director on my second to last day. Creating that paper record was not an act of kindness. It was an act of clarity. I wanted it on record that I had told them exactly what they had and exactly what could go wrong. On my last day, I said goodbye to the people I respected. I drove home. I sat at the kitchen table with Sandra, and I told her it was done. She cried. I didn't. I left Veridon on a Friday. The following Monday, I slept past 7 for the first time in years. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. I had no meetings, no emails I was required to answer, no system to check. For the first time in a decade, the lab was not my problem. I told myself I was going to give it time, find the next step carefully, talk to Patricia about the legal process, help Ava with her college applications. Breathe. 11 days after I walked out of that building, my phone started ringing. The first call was from a former colleague, a technician named Brian who had been at Veridon for 6 years. He asked me if I had heard what happened. I told him I hadn't. He told me the tracking system had gone down. Not a partial failure, a full crash. The database had corrupted. He said it happened the Wednesday after I left. Danielle's team had gone into the back end of the system and changed a core data entry parameter, something they had done before, the same kind of change that had caused the 2 crashes while I was still there, except this time there was no one who knew how to fix it. 3 days of sample data were gone. Not delayed. Gone. Unrecoverable. 2 active client testing cycles had been running during the failure. Both were compromised. The results from those cycles could not be certified. The clients had to be notified. I listened to Brian without saying much. I thanked him for calling. I hung up and sat very still for a moment. The second call came 2 hours later. It was David Lorne from Harmon Crest. He was professional, as he always was, but I could hear the weight in his voice. He told me Harmon Crest had placed Veridon on formal probationary status. One more compliance failure, any kind, any size, and they would terminate the contract. He said he was calling me because he wanted me to know, and because he had some questions he hoped I could answer as a private individual, not as a Veridon employee. I told him I was no longer a Veridon employee. There was a pause. Then he said, I see. The third call came the next morning. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I answered it. It was Paul Greider, Veridon's CFO, the same man from the email thread I had printed and stored at home months earlier. He asked if we could talk. I told him he should contact my attorney and gave him Patricia's number. He paused. Then he said he understood. We ended the call in under 2 minutes. In the days that followed, I learned, through Brian and through David Lorne, what had continued to unravel. Delway Group had sent a formal notice of contract review. Paulton Health, without any dramatic announcement, had quietly transferred their active testing batch to a competing lab. They didn't make a fuss. They just left, the way clients leave when they have already made up their minds and don't feel the need to explain themselves. Then Patricia called me. She told me that Veridon's legal counsel had been reviewing the company's exposure in the wake of the operational failures. When they pulled the relevant communications, including the HR letter I had sent, the emails I had preserved, and the documentation trail I had built over the preceding months, they flagged a serious problem. The combination of the irregular promotion process and the documented operational collapse created significant legal exposure for the company. Richard Calloway was placed on administrative leave within 3 weeks of my last day. 2 board members requested a full internal audit. The lab's largest outside investor called an emergency review meeting. I want to be honest with you about what I felt when I heard all of this. It was not what I expected. It wasn't satisfaction the way I had imagined it might feel. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't even relief, exactly. It was quiet, a very specific kind of quiet. The kind that comes when you spent 10 years being told in 100 different ways that you were not important enough, and then 11 days after you walked out, the building stopped working. That kind of quiet is hard to describe. But if you have ever been invisible for long enough, I think you already know what it feels like. It has been about 2 years since I left Veridon Bioanalytics. Let me tell you what happened, plainly and simply, because I think you deserve the full picture. David Lorne at Harmon Crest reached out to me about 3 weeks after the system collapse. Not as a Veridon contact, as a potential consultant. He told me Harmon Crest was in the process of evaluating a new testing lab partner and asked if I would be willing to help them navigate that process, reviewing candidates, assessing compliance readiness, asking the right questions. I said yes. That was my first consulting contract. Within 4 months, I had 3. Harmon Crest, a mid-sized biotech firm that had found me through a referral, and a compliance consulting group that needed someone with working knowledge of pharmaceutical testing operations. By the end of that first year, I was earning more than the $118,000 manager position I had been passed over for. I was earning it on my own terms, without a director above me deciding what I was worth. The legal process moved quietly alongside all of this. Patricia and Veridon's counsel went back and forth for several months. I will not give you a number because the settlement was confidential. What I will tell you is that it was meaningful. Meaningful enough that Sandra and I sat at the kitchen table the night it was finalized and didn't say much for a while. We just sat there. Richard Calloway's employment at Veridon was terminated as part of the findings from the internal audit. Danielle Voss had already left the company 6 weeks after I did. I don't know where either of them went. I haven't looked. Veridon itself did not survive as an independent company. The combination of client losses, the operational failures, the audit findings, and the legal exposure made it too damaged to continue on its own. It was restructured and partially absorbed by a larger testing group about 14 months after I left. The name Veridon Bioanalytics no longer exists as a standalone operation. Ava started college that fall. She's studying biology. She doesn't know every detail of what happened at my job. She knows enough. She knows her dad left a place that wasn't treating him right, and that things worked out. That's enough for her to know. The mortgage is fine. Sandra went back to part-time work that year, not because we needed her to, but because she wanted to. She seems lighter than she has in years. I think I do too. Now, sometimes younger people ask me for advice. People who are where I was competent, dependable, doing work that holds things together while someone else gets the title and the money and the recognition. They want to know what to do. I tell them this. Document everything. Not because you're planning to go to war, but because invisible work only becomes visible when there's a record of it. Keep your own record. Protect yourself. And then I tell them the harder thing. There's a difference between being loyal to your work and being loyal to a company. Your work is yours. The skills you build, the relationships you earn, the systems you create, those belong to you. A company is just the place where you happen to be applying them right now. When a company shows you, clearly and repeatedly, that it does not value what you bring, that is information. The mistake is not in seeing it. The mistake is in ignoring it and hoping something changes. I spent too long hoping. I'm not angry about it anymore. I understand why it happened. People like Richard Calloway exist everywhere. They always will. The question is never whether they exist. The question is how long you let their opinion of you become your opinion of yourself. 10 years is a long time to hold something up. At some point, you have to decide it's okay to put it down.